picks up. Yeah, it's okay to go out and when you're in a shootout and put on a show, but when you start getting into these games where ball control matters and where every possession matters and you can't turn the football over, you can't have games where you make those mistakes and that's what you fall back on. And for this team, they're still fighting for a number one seed. They had played before the Saints on Sunday. The Saints were the Monday night game at Carolina, a desperate team. So you would have thought that the Rams would have come out in primetime after basically looking horrible the week before in primetime at Chicago and played much better. And frankly, Goff just really didn't do a lot in that game that really impressed me. So I've got my eye on that down the road when this team gets into the playoffs. And we've already talked about the competition that could be out there. It looks like they're going to get the bye. But when they turn the corner for their first game in that divisional round, they could be playing pretty stiff competition and then have to go on the road, potentially back to a team like New Orleans and play. I just don't know how much faith right now I have in Jared Goff. And I don't know if that's going to come back versus San Francisco and Arizona, for example.
Yeah, and you definitely made a lot of good points there. I think for me, the biggest point is that a first-round bye could actually work against a team like the Rams when they have a guy like Goff struggling behind center at the moment that they're going into the playoffs, because we know that after the wild card week, you're going to get one of those tough teams coming in that has had all the momentum on their side. You've just had a week off. Yes, you have an extra week to prepare, but now you're going into a game against a team like the Cowboys, Eagles, Bears, Vikings, Seahawks. Any of those teams could still be in the mix for that wild card win and then move on to that conference round. And I'm just not sure if you're the Rams, you want to get into that if Goff is struggling, like you say.
Well, Eric, let's take it to another California team, and this one that's actually trending in the right directions. As let's take it back to Thursday Night Football, as the San Diego Chargers went into Kansas City, and behind the performance of Hunter Henry and Dan Fouts at quarterback, beat the Kansas City. Wait a second. Hold on, Eric. I got Stephen A. Smith's notes here. Let me get rid of those things. I don't need those because I know from actually watching the Los Angeles Chargers this year that Phillip Rivers went in there even after losing Keenan Allen in that game. Boy, Mike Williams put on a show and really showed out of why he was such a high pick for that Chargers team last year, as he was often injured last year, but he had a monster game on Thursday night. But Eric, before we jump into this game, got to take it back. We had some fun on Twitter as Stephen A. Smith went on First Take and made an absolute ass of himself and then backed it up on Twitter with even a more ridiculous comment to try to cover himself. So what are we to make of this? Was this simply a slip of the tongue for him, or is this a guy that's just not watching a lot of football?
No, this was not a slip of the tongue. A slip of the tongue is when you would say Hunter Hurst Helmsley instead of Hunter Henry or something like that. This is a guy who's supposed to be analyzing an upcoming game and naming 3 players in his breakdown that will not take the field for the Los Angeles Chargers that Stephen A. Smith thinks are still from San Diego. No, absolutely not a slip of the tongue. When you don't know that Hunter Henry hasn't been on the field all year because of a knee injury, when you don't know that another guy that he's mentioning is retired, when you don't, I mean, it just kind of crazy how that all went out. And you could see it. I mean, as we talked about pre-show, Max Kellerman, Teddy Bruschi, everyone in the ESPN world, they're looking at him like, what are you talking about? It was hilarious. And I think guys like us who seem to know more about football than guys that are getting paid millions of dollars, we deserve to be able to laugh at that.
For sure. I just thought it was completely embarrassing. And he's doing it with such conviction. You're like, oh, this Hunter Henry, Derek Johnson matchup. I mean, it's going to be what I'm watching for. Like, okay, well, one of them has a torn ACL and the other one's sitting at home waiting for a phone call. Oh, and by the way, Spencer Ware, he's out. Anybody who plays fantasy football that's in the playoffs knew that days ago. And we're on the waiver wire looking for the backup running backs in this game. So, Eric, I think it just exposed him as a guy that I think he watches as much Chargers football as I watch that garbage First Take. That's all it is. He has become nothing but a hot take machine. He's a parody. He's something that people make fun of because his opinions are just junk. I mean, NBA-wise, yeah, he's probably locked in those circles. But NFL, he's not watching those games. You don't say that. Then he goes on Twitter and says he was talking about Virgil Green. Virgil Green hasn't been a difference maker forever. In his entire NFL career, he doesn't even have 20 catches on the year. And we're, 14 games into the season? I don't think he was going to be the difference maker Stephen A. Smith was trying to cover himself with. So just take your medicine, Stephen A. You don't watch a lot of NFL football. It's fine, but just don't go out there and try to sell us a freaking lie. Simple as that. So Eric, let's take it back to this game because for a while, Thursday night, it looked like Kansas City was about to run off in this game. They were up by as many as 14 in this game, even in the second half. And Phillip Rivers and this Chargers team, they just kept coming back as we saw them do in Pittsburgh. And then they went for two and they went for the win, Eric. So let me get your reaction to that. We've talked about this a lot, this aggressive play calling in the NFL. Did you like their call in the moment last Thursday night?
I knew this was going to come up because we've talked about this so often. I was actually over at my friend Matt's house, who's the big Chiefs fan that I always talk about. He's rooting for the Chiefs. I just wanted to see a good football game. Turns out that I did see a good football game, but unfortunately it was at the expense of my buddy who was sitting there almost crying because the Chiefs gave up 14 points in the last 4 minutes. But I was sitting there on the recliner yelling at the television, do not go for two. And I stand my ground on this. Now, it worked out for the Chargers. They look like the heroes. Fine, all well and good. We know that when it works out, you look great. But more often than not, as it has many other times this year, it doesn't work out and you take the L. So here's the thing. If you're the Chargers, you have just fought, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, you have just fought for 59 and a half minutes in a football game and you're willing to blow that out of one play. All that you've done defensively, all that you've done on special teams, all that you've done on offense, you're willing to say on one play that takes about 6 seconds, I'm going to throw all of that away if Rivers gets sacked or if Rivers can't complete the pass or whatever the case may be, you're going to throw it all away at that time for one play. Doesn't make any sense to me. I'm always going to be in favor of playing more football, especially when the momentum has been on your side for the past 4 minutes. I think the Chargers could have still won that game in overtime, and I think it just was such a big risk. Now, I understand that they were still in a pretty good position for the wild card, even if they lost. And if they win, they really take control. I just don't like it. I'm going to stick to my guns there, Justin. I think you're willing to throw away 59 and a half minutes of football on one play.
I've been in lockstep with you on this every time we've talked about it, from the Colts to the Titans. We've talked about both of those teams going for it, and it was basically the situation that they did it in. I actually had no problem with what they did on Thursday night because of what you just talked about. They were already locked in as the 5 seed. They were basically playing with house money at that point. If they go for it and they get it, they win the football game. They don't have to go to overtime. They don't have to expose their players to potentially, on a short week, playing more and more and more minutes, more plays, more snaps, more chance for injury. They had already lost Keenan Allen in that game. They're down Melvin Organ. They're down Austin Eckler. They can't really afford too many more injuries. So from that standpoint, I thought it was a great gamble because they didn't have anything to lose. Even if they lost that game, they were still going to be the 5 seed in the playoffs. By winning it, now they put a lot of pressure on Kansas City that they have to go into Seattle this week, and they've got to find a way to win that game, because if somehow they drop a game and the Chargers go 2-0 in their final 2 weeks of the season, they're going to win the division and potentially be the number 1 seed in the AFC. So I just felt like in that moment, most of the time I'm right there with you. I don't agree with just throwing everything away at that point, but I felt the Chargers were in a position where they could gamble. And they were just playing with house money at that point. And if they took a loss, really wasn't that big of a deal for them because it wasn't going to hurt their playoff chances. Now, they didn't have to worry about going back on the field. They didn't give the ball back to Patrick Mahomes in overtime. We saw what happened in Dallas. That just because you go to overtime, you may not even ever touch the football. There was a chance in that game if Cooper doesn't get that ball tipped to him last week, Dallas could have kicked the field goal, and the Eagles basically would have had almost no time to try to go down just to get in field goal range for a tie. So I think for that point, Eric, for this week, I got to go the other way. I like what Anthony Lynn did in that moment. Again, I think he was just playing with house money. So, Eric, let me ask you this. We know the Chargers, they're tied with the Chiefs. The Chiefs own the tiebreaker by having a better divisional record. But here we are with 2 weeks left in the season. The Chiefs have sort of struggled over the last couple weeks. It really feels like since Kareem Hunt got cut from this team, they've sort of lost their way. They went into Oakland. They struggled to beat the Raiders. They had to go to overtime to beat the Ravens. And then they lose a close one to the Chargers this week. So are the Chargers the best team in the AFC, or is this Kansas City team still the team that you're looking at? They just got to find their footing now that they've lost one of their major playmakers.
Well, let me hit on the Kareem Hunt thing first of all, Justin, because I understand that point, and I think it's something that the media and a lot of the fans would look at and think, okay, you've lost Kareem Hunt, that must be a big deal. But you're seeing with an Andy Reid running game, much like we're seeing in Pittsburgh, it's kind of plug and play. I mean, Williams had a great game. So it's not because of the running game that they lost. Mahomes struggled a little bit. Tyreek Hill struggled a little bit. They just couldn't make that connection. The Chargers were firing on all cylinders there in the second half, especially during that comeback. To answer your question, the Chiefs are a major concern to me right now because in the last 4 weeks, they gave up 54, 33, 24, and 29 points. If you're Mahomes and you're struggling to get the ball out to Hill or to Kelsey or to others and your running game is, like I said, sufficient, but you're just not clicking on all cylinders, that defense isn't going to cover you. They're just not with Kansas City. So I think they're in a major problem coming into Seattle, and they got to play Oakland again, which they really should win. But the Chargers, I mean, I watched that game, like I said, the whole game. I was pretty tuned into it. I saw Phillip Rivers connecting with his receivers, even without Keenan Allen down with that injury during the game. Williams played great for them. Benjamin, you had contributions. You had contributions from all over that field, including Jackson, their fill-in running back for them, without Melvin Gordon and Eckler. It just seemed like the Chargers had another gear when they really needed it, and that's what you've been seeing over the last 2 to 3 months from the Chargers. With the sputtering that's going on in New England, with the uncertainty that you never know what you're going to get in Pittsburgh, I think the Texans are strong. But if you had to bet on an AFC champion today, I would think highly about putting money on the Los Angeles Chargers.
And what's funny is we talked about this in the preview show because you took the Chiefs to win the division. I took the Chargers, and here they sit 14 weeks in, tied. So we knew going into the season that the Chargers were going to be a good football team. And we even talked about their wide receiver group that obviously now you hope that Keenan Allen is healthy for them. But then you had Tyrell Williams, you had Mike Williams, you have Travis Benjamin, and then you throw in Melvin Gordon, and even the fact that they brought Antonio Gates back, and he's been very solid for them. And actually, maybe Stephen A. Smith was a little early. Hunter Henry was finally back on the practice field this week. So you start to think about, wow, could he actually make some kind of a comeback for maybe the second round of the playoffs or something? And they could add even another weapon. And even on the defensive side, they got Bosa back basically 9-10 games into the season. So they've got pass rushers on this team. They've got good linebacker play, and they may have the defensive rookie of the year in Derwin James on the back end. So this is a very deep team. They very much remind me of the Saints, Eric, that they can put up a lot of points, but I also think they're a team that could grind out a win if they had to, that they could stand on their defense and their run game if they really needed to. Now, they need to get Melvin Gordon back, but at this point for them, it might be better not to rush him back and have him sitting there ready for the playoffs. But Eric, when you look at these two teams, one of them is going to win the division, and one of them is going to be the 5 seed and going to go on the road to play a division winner. So if you're sitting there and you're a team like the Texans or the Patriots or the Steelers that are sort of jostling around for that potential 4th seed, who would you rather not see come into your building on Wild Card Weekend?
Well, because we're so close and we have recency bias, I would say I would rather not see the Chargers. They're just peaking at the right time, whereas I think, as you alluded to, the Chiefs probably peaked a little too early. However, when the Chiefs get hot, I know their defense is really not that good, but when they get hot offensively, you're talking about a team that can put up 38, 42, 30, 43, 45, 51, 40. They can put up points in bunches. So I still think the Chiefs are, they're not overrated. They can have a fantastic week and go gangbusters on the scoreboard. It's their defense that concerns me a lot. So right now, as far as peaking, heading into whether you're going to be a 5 seed, I wouldn't want to see any part of the Chargers.
I think the easier answer, Eric, is you just don't want to see either one of them. If you work so hard to win a division, you get a home game and you turn around and one of those two teams are coming into your building, that's going to be a somber group of fans for that home team because you work hard all season and you're going to catch one of the best teams in the AFC right off the bat. That's not going to be easy. But Eric, one team that's put themselves in the position to maybe fall into that 4th seed is the New England Patriots. They've dropped back-to-back games now, and it's December. This is normally not the time of the year that you see a Patriots team losing meaningful games, and yet they've dropped 2 straight. This team doesn't look very good at all. Brady looks all of 40-plus years old. Gronkowski looks like he's even older than Brady. They just don't look very good. They're sloppy play. They're racking up penalties. So, Eric, this is a team that the schedule might just bail them out as they play the Jets and the Bills in their final 2 weeks. But are the Patriots now a candidate to potentially be a one-and-done playoff team this year? Or do you think they can rebound and catch that bye and maybe get some rest as an older team?
Without